Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. The last two election cycles have seen a record number of women serving in Congress. Not only that, women have come to the forefront and continue to make strides in many industries. Of course, we want to see this trend continue, and our guest today explores the history of the impact and influence of women in our society in her book of essays, Girl, 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 on womanhood and belonging in the age of Black girl magic. Let's welcome, all the way from London, Ms. Kenya Hunt to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Great to meet you. Thank you for having me.
I mentioned just a moment ago in the intro that you are in London now, but of course you are a transplanted American. So
yes.
Tell our listeners what part of the country you're from.
Well, I grew up in Virginia, and then I moved to New York after school, like so many people do, and then eventually made my way here with my boyfriend at the time, thinking we would stay for a year, 2 years max, just to get a feel for the place and have the experience and move back home. And here we are, 11 years later.
That's usually the way it works. You get an idea, let's go visit for a little while, and then you end up falling in love with the place, or other circumstances happen, and you end up, next thing you know, 11 years have passed and you're still there. So as I was reading the title, some of our listeners who obviously can't see me with the book will probably think, well, why is he repeating the same word so many times? Well, can you get into why you chose the unique spelling variations? Because you had the standard spelling of girl, then you had the vernacular spelling with G-U-R-L, then you had a little growl with a G-R-R-R-L. So what caused you to use that variation?
Well, there are actually even more variations that we use on the cover here in the UK, because I use the Gwirl, which is G-W-O-R-L, which you tend to get in certain communities as well. I mean, there's so many different spellings of it, but I pepper my speech with the term girl an awful lot, particularly when I'm talking to my girlfriends, specifically my Black girlfriends more than anything else, and my sister. And I just hadn't noticed how much I used the term until my son, he was 5 at the time, parroted it back to me. Like, he mimics me saying it. And then he used all of the different intonations and ways that I say it. And it was just so funny hearing him, his little 5-year-old voice, mimic my usage of it. And it just made me reflect on the way that, Black women use it. It really is the root of a love language between us. And it can have a multitude of meanings. We spell it a variety of ways. We, pronounce it a range of ways. And I just think, to me, it really is like a really potent sound of Blackness. When I hear it, or you just meet someone and you say it, and there's a certain kind of like kinship there. Not always, but sometimes. I just think it's a term that really means a lot to me. And then also being here in the UK and hearing women from all walks of life use it the way that we use it back home, it's just been interesting to chart its migration as well.
I mentioned that this is a book of essays and is primarily personal essays, although you do have some guest writers involved in it as well. But so what prompted you to create this, reflection, so to speak, of your life and the way that you see things to create this particular this publication?
Basically, what inspired me was my love of Black women. I just wanted to write a love letter to us and also participate in this moment that I was observing, in which there was just heightened visibility across a range of industries and sectors. I mean, I work in fashion, and, there were a group of us who were coming up who were working to diversify the industry. We were seeing, Black women on magazine covers in unprecedented ways and reaching milestones, but then also politically, there were so many wins, this year has been incredible, between Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams and so many other examples. But, in the political space, I was watching Black women go from milestone to milestone. And then in the culture space, everyone from Lena Waithe and Melina through to Issa Rae. There have been so many incredible sort of Black image makers and storytellers and creators of film and television who are really rising and pushing through and telling our stories. In terms of the literary space, I wanted to participate in that through my own personal experience as a Black American woman coming into a new understanding or an evolved understanding of my Blackness as it relates to my life as an expat. And I wanted to introduce, invite women I know and admire to contribute their stories to it, because I think it's quite an interesting thing to consider Blackness outside of America. I have quite a few friends who tell me that they never consider themselves as being Black until they set foot in the States. And so, there really isn't one way to be Black, and we all have varying experiences and notions of what that means.
So you touched on the idea of the fashion industry and how Black women have really become a lot more, become a stronger force in that industry. Talk to us a little bit about your background, because I think you are actually in fashion editing yourself. So talk to us a little bit about that, and especially more about the essay In the Front Row and what that really entails and what the impetus behind that was.
Yeah, so I'm currently the fashion director of Grazia, which is a very popular fashion title here with a very large audience. And then before that, I was at Elle magazine. I was their deputy editor. And before that, I was the fashion features director there at Elle. I started my career at a magazine called Jane. I worked at a number of places. I was the global style director of a global network of newspapers called Metro. So I've worked in the women's media space for quite a long time, particularly in the fashion space. I was reviewing shows and collections for Vogue Italy at one stage. And so with The Front Row, I think, that essay, I really wanted to explore what that experience is like, being the only one in the room or the only one of two or three, which is an experience that many Black people share in. I think fashion can feel quite isolating, no matter where you come from, no matter what race you are, because, it's an industry that's really built on this idea of aspiration and exclusivity and being, in that world of the rarefied, 1%, whether it be, that 1% in terms of wealth or beauty or access or what have you. And so then I think for me, being here as a Black American woman, navigating a whole new country and, and an industry that can feel incredibly insular and hard to access, that was quite an isolating experience. And so community has been, was so helpful to me in terms of being able to navigate it. And then also the community that the network I established with, the very few other Black women who are working in this space here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what In the Front Row is almost it's a metaphor of the actual in the front row, where when you're at a fashion show, being able to sit in the front row of the show right next to the catwalk is that coveted exclusive space. So this is kind of taking its tone from that.
Yes. Well, because I tend to sit front row at a lot of the shows that I go to, or, or the second row or whatever. But, so it's really kind of speaking to that experience of having that coveted front row seat and having the heightened awareness of the fact that there's so few other faces of color in the room. And so what that's like when you finally get that seat, that people have worked so hard and coveting to get in this strange little world with these strange little hierarchies, and what that experience is like as a Black woman when there's so few of us in the room and in the space as a whole.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that experience transcends industries, because it comes from the term is more for or focused on the fashion industry per se, but I mean, you can see that, talk about that anywhere, whether you're in a Fortune 500 company or if you're in a school or wherever you happen to be, you're going to basically have those same experiences. You touched on a little bit about the different types of people that you meet, that you have met, and that you continue to meet. And so I want to talk a little bit about your essay on skin folk, because as a light-skinned Black person myself, and especially here in America, we tend to experience, I guess, Blackness from a lot of different perspectives. And so because of the skin color or the skin tone, you are given or labeled with a particular level of Blackness per se because of your skin color and so forth. So talk to me about what your particular experiences have been dealing with this colorism issue from both an American perspective as well as an international perspective.
Well, I think it's interesting because I grew up in Virginia where you were either Black or white, and that was it. I mean, I didn't really, what country you might have come from just didn't come into the equation because we were all from America, and no one really got too specific beyond that. Like you were either Black or you were white. And then the American experience, our discussions around race were largely centered around America and slavery, the legacy of slavery. And so it was really interesting and eye-opening to move to a country and honestly I'd met people in New York who hail from all over the diaspora and at university before, but there was something about leaving home, like leaving the country and moving to the UK and really betting into the community here and building a whole new set of friendships and a different understanding of Blackness in which America was not the center of it, basically. And so the way that we talk about race and the people who are those pivotal figures in Black history, it looks different, basically. It's a different history. It's a different understanding. Slavery, the legacy of slavery and the history of slavery in the States, it was like, it was everywhere. You can't escape it. It was on American soil, whereas here there's very much this perception of slavery having happened elsewhere. And as a result, sometimes I think the legacy of that is the very real sort of sense that people tend to have mistakenly that racism is something that happens elsewhere, that it's not the same problem here in the UK. So I think that's one interesting point. And then also just how, our understanding and experience of Blackness changes so radically or just changes so interestingly depending on where in the diaspora you sit. And so, it was just really quite eye-opening for me because, I learned not to center America in everything because, there's a whole world outside of that. And so I would often, engage in these debates and these discussions from a viewpoint that in retrospect, I now find quite narrow. And that's just because I needed to hear, and you don't have to live elsewhere to get that. I mean, it's just through reading and education and conversing with people.
It's interesting that you say that because a lot of people, especially here in the States, have always, I guess, gotten the impression that England and other international countries are more tolerant of Black people and don't really look at them as inferior as they do here in the States. When we think about all of our entertainers in the past have found much more success when they go overseas than they do here. So that to hear you say that there may be even there's still that tinge of racism even in countries overseas, that kind of shatters the image that a lot of us Americans have had about the impressions and the levels of tolerance that is experienced over there. So talk to that a little bit more as far as what the overall impact is, as well as far as people of color when they do go into, or actually, is there a stigma with American Blacks as opposed to Blacks from other parts of the world in regards to internet in England or other international areas?
I don't know if I would use the word stigma. I would say that there there can be divisions,
Mm-hmm.
there can be tensions, and there can be fractures. But I think you get that in any family as well. I mean, I think, they tend to talk about the diaspora wars here, and, how there are these debates that spring up, these misconceptions that we have about each other. I have friends who come from some who come from various African countries who've spent time in America, who've had a rough time and some rough experiences being misunderstood by Black Americans, for instance, and then vice versa. I have some Black American friends who have lived here in certain African countries who felt misunderstood. And so I think there's, I think the way that we come up, what we learn in school, I think we grow up learning so little about each other. You have to work hard to find the reading and the authors. We don't get it in school, really. We're not encouraged. We don't get the reading list to really teach us and inform us about the diasporic experience. When I was coming up, I was reading incredible authors, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and these were experiences that were all rooted in America. These were incredible, phenomenal women. But it wasn't until later that I began to learn about, the literary canon outside of the Black literary canon outside of America, and began to really learn about and familiarize myself with a full spectrum of authors who can speak to various aspects of the lived experience of Africa and various countries within Africa. So I think there's a lot of room for growth there. And I think, books and the act of writing, the work of writing, can do wonders to sort of fill that gap. And then other areas as well, I thought it was really interesting, the controversy around Beyonce's Black is King, how that was so beautiful. But then, there was a lot of frustration that, there was a lot of critique, it's the subject of a lot of critique and debate from people from Nigeria and Ghana and a range of countries who definitely didn't necessarily see themselves in it.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Ms. Kenya Hunt, author of the book Girl, 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 on Womanhood and Belonging in the Age of Black Girl Magic. Let's shift gears just a little bit and kind of bring it back into the United States for a moment, because I want to go back to your hometown or your home state of Virginia, and the essay on Sally Hemings and Hidden Figures. That read to me as almost a historical journey or historical reflection through your eyes as far as the importance and impact of the role of women in our society. Am I correct in that, making that assumption, or can you talk to me a little bit about your what influenced you to write that one?
I think what influenced me to write that was, I'm a big believer in journaling, and I had the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, had really, I found that to be really personally quite upsetting and disturbing as an alum of UVA. I went to school there. And so I was a student there, walking the grounds of the University of Virginia, and oftentimes as did many of my Black peers who were students there, questioning the history of the school and the fact that, the way that Thomas Jefferson's, relationship with, and I'm using air quotation marks as I say that, with Sally.
Entanglement, as it's come to be.
Entanglement, which is how they would have tried to have framed it, was framed in a way that was incredibly problematic. Either we very rarely saw representations of Sally on the campus, or when it was discussed, it was through these kind of rose-tinted lens that were not accurate at all. And then also so that really just got me thinking about the history of the school that I went to, but also this idea of the hidden figures narrative, which we're also familiar with. This idea of Black women being written out of the stories and not really receiving the credit for the work that they've done. And so I think I felt like, in a way, we're kind of all daughters of Sally Hemings. There's so many times when we encounter these headlines that read like, meet the Black woman behind this success story or that success story. It's, it's something that I often see online, and it will always resonate with me, because I'm just like, we don't want to meet the Black woman behind, but meet the Black woman who did this X, Y, or Z. And so, just that kind of yearning and desire to see Black women essentially receive their flowers and be recognized essentially. I think it's a really interesting thing, because this year is the 100th year anniversary of the birth of Henrietta Lacks. Have you ever heard of Henrietta Lacks?
No, I have to say, embarrassingly enough, I have not.
She was born in Virginia, and her cells were harvested without her knowledge after she passed away of cancer. And her cells have been used to power the vast majority of the wins and innovations that we've seen in medicine. So everything from cancer treatments to IVF, all comes from her cells, and they call them HeLa cells, and they're the most important cells in all of science. And this was a Black woman. No one knew it for the longest. It wasn't widely known until a documentary and a book were done about it roughly 10 years ago. And there's so many stories like that. History is filled with those stories. And so I wanted to, explore that through this essay.
No, I think that's very important that you do, because that's something that I didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners didn't know as well. So thank you for enlightening us with that piece of information. And I'm sure there are other little nuggets and things like that in your book as well. We talked about, or I mentioned earlier, how entertainers of the past, Black entertainers of the past, used to find refuge in England and in other European countries because they were more accepted over there. So I want to talk a little bit about the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin, and what your impression was viewing the funeral, and what thoughts were generated by her particular her career to influence you to write this essay, and where you were. And I think where you were while watching the funeral is also important, especially within the Black community, that particular location. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So her funeral, first of all, I had never been more hyped for a funeral. And I remember thinking, why am I so excited and hyped to see this funeral? I mean, literally, this is terrible. The Queen of Soul has passed away. But I mean, it was going to be such an extravaganza, even leading up to it, the week, all the viewings of her body and the wardrobe changes. And it was so befitting of the Queen.
Not her wardrobe changes.
Yes, they changed her wardrobes and the viewings and the caskets.
Wow.
They changed her clothes. So, she would have on these red Christian Louboutins and a matching red outfit one day. It was blue, sapphire blue the next. It was quite an experience. It was incredible. And as it should be, because we're talking about Aretha Franklin here. So when the day of the funeral came out, it was okay, I really want to see this, an incredible lineup of talent. And it coincided with the day that I had an appointment booked in the salon to get my hair braided. So we already know the experience of getting your hair braided is a time commitment.
Yes.
And the funeral, we know based on the agenda that they made public, we saw, from the run-up show that this was going to be a time commitment as well. So it was great. Let me get in the hair salon. Let me order my food. So I had my food in my lap, waiting for my, getting my hair massage and deep conditioning treatment, waiting for the hair braiding to start. Great. So the funeral begins, and I just felt like I was watching my whole religious life pass before my eyes. And so it was so triggering in a way, because I grew up in Virginia, which is, definitely, it counts as the Bible Belt for sure.
Yes.
It's the land of the Christian right. I grew up in the Baptist church, but also I grew up with a real sort of, experiencing the poles of the Black church experience from my grandmother's really, really teeny tiny church. It was a single room, where you'd have all these older, beautiful Black women in their hats and their white gloves. So there's a different kind of church experience, which is much smaller, to the one that I went to with my mom and my parents, which was a bigger, more upwardly mobile church where the collection plates were like heaving and they were constantly adding on new wings and it was glossy and they'd have the gospel competitions and everything was an event and it was on the map. You'd get like famous ministers coming through and all of that. So that was a different kind of church experience. And then, I had gone on my own journey after that because I never really quite felt like I fit in. I didn't feel like I found a place for myself within the Black church as I knew it growing up, even though I had a real intense love for it. But oftentimes I feel alienated by it. So then afterwards, after school, I'd kind of go searching, for something, visiting various churches and being a part of one church for quite a long time that I realized this is really not the religion that I want to be a part of after a certain period in time. And so, I found it to be just quite fascinating and interesting right now in this point in my life, because so many of my girlfriends who have similar histories as myself growing up in conventional Black churches have just completely gravitated towards all the forms of religion that we were told not to engage with growing up. So it's everything from Ifa to like Santeria to crystals to Buddhism, to everything that our grandmothers would balk at, essentially. And so, and a lot of religions like Hoodoo and things like that have their origins in the continent. And so that's people can write books about that alone, but I wanted to just write about my own particular experience, about my experience of religion and my journey and sort of move away from it and how Black women can often feel disempowered by it. I feel like I had to sort of leave the organized church to find a place where I could feel more empowered in my spiritual life.
So let me ask you this in the time that we do have remaining. How important do you think that social media outlets like Twitter have been in shaping the narrative of Black women today?
I think it's been incredibly important in that, when you look at the origins of some of the most influential hashtags that have been driving, real movements, everything from Black Lives Matter to Black Girl Magic to Black Excellence, these are, a lot of them have been powered by communities on Twitter. And so, I think social media is a tool that Black women have used to tremendous effect. People are studying it in universities, marketers, study it and release papers about it. It's such a phenomenon. So yeah, I think Twitter has, been hugely important to the advancements that Black women have been able to make, but a number of communities as well. Social media has just been so pivotal in our lives.
Well, we definitely like to thank our guest today, Ms. Kenya Hunt, author of the book Girl, 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 on womanhood and belonging in the age of Black Girl Magic, for coming on our show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to meet you.
Same here, same here. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.